Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Palyan. I am the Policy Program Manager over at Violence Free Minnesota, and I'm here with my friend Ingrid to give a training on legislative advocacy and how we can advocate towards our legislators. I'm going to turn it over to Ingrid to introduce ourselves, and then we can get started with the PowerPoint.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ingrid Anderson. I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy for MIWSAC, the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and we are so excited to be sharing this information with you today.
All right, so what we're talking about today is legislative advocacy. How can you talk to your lawmakers and decision makers to try to influence the rules that apply to Minnesota? And so a couple notes on how this is going to go today. This is a re-recording of a presentation that Ingrid and I have already given on a couple occasions, once generally to our Action Day training, and then once to Mending the Sacred Hoop members. The goal here is to be usable for Mending the Sacred Hoop and MIWSAC members specifically. And so I just wanted to note that from the outset that this has been a little bit modified, but if you have seen those previous trainings, this is going to fall into that same vein. Next slide. First thing to note, this is not legal advice. I am a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. If you have any doubts about anything in this presentation, you should run it by a nonprofit's attorney or attorney of the actual area that you're wondering about. But we're trying to help you be most effective when messaging. If there's anything in here that you are thinking of as legal advice, run it by somebody else. And I think the last little bit before I turn it over to Ingrid is to talk about just these are the 6 crime victims coalitions in Minnesota. If you're not familiar with all of them, I'm happy to run through them for you. So top left there, Mending the Sacred Hoop. That is our tribal domestic violence program. There's Minnesota Children's Alliance. That is our coalition for children. The Minnesota Alliance on Crime. That's general crime. Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. That is our coalition for Indian women specific to sexual assault. The Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, General Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and Violence Free Minnesota, which is the statewide coalition against relationship abuse. Oh, this is still my part, my bad. So we're going to go through how the Minnesota legislature works first. And we're going to do this just quickly about how a bill generally moves in the Minnesota legislature. So if we go to the next slide, we've got a little flow chart. So a bill always starts out as an idea. And that idea is introduced as a bill which is drafted by an author, the author being a senator or representative. But generally, that idea comes from the community. So someone like Ingrid or I will bring it to a legislator and say, here's a problem in your community and a proposed solution. Oftentimes, we're even pre-drafting the bill before it's actually even introduced into the legislature. It'll be given a formal reading, which is just the House or Senate acknowledging that they've received it and assigning it to appropriate committees. At this point, it goes down 2 separate but parallel paths. So it's going to go to its specific House or Senate, and then it's going to go through its committee hearings. A bill might have 1 or more committee hearings depending on its subject matter. There's several different committees within the House and the Senate. And we need to make sure that every single committee that could care about this bill has seen it. So if we think about, for example, the funding bill for crime victim services, on the Senate side, that's going to only have to go to the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. That's 1 committee. But on the House side, it's going to go to the House Judiciary and the House Public Safety. That's 2 different committees on the other side of the aisle. So both of those things, it's going to have to go through both of those things. It's going to come through a committee vote, and the committee has to approve it. And then it'll get a full Senate or full House reading and a discussion on the floor of the House for every single member to vote on it to see if it passes. If it does pass, it gets sent over to the other side to be discussed. So it goes from the Senate to the House or the House to the Senate and approved. Can we go next slide? And eventually, what we'll have is a bill that has passed through both the Senate and the House. And if those 2 bills are different, if the Senate bill and the House bill are different, they have to have what's called a conference committee. That means that people, a few senators and a few House members get together with their two similar but different bills. They both kind of negotiate, and I sometimes just say they hit it with hammers until it's something they can both live with. And then they bring it back to their own sides for final approval. If it's finally approved, it goes to the governor, who can sign it or veto it. If the governor signs it, it becomes a law. If the governor vetoes it, it has to repass with 2/3 of the House in the Senate. Something really important to note: at any point in this process in Minnesota politics, a tie is a loss. You might remember in federal politics, if a bill ties in the Senate, the vice president can step in to cast the tie-breaking vote. In Minnesota, you have to have a majority. There is no tiebreaker. All ties are the same thing as saying no. The other important thing to note is that this version of how things flow isn't how they always actually end up flowing. Oftentimes, a bill is put into what's called an omnibus bill, which is a giant bill made up of all of the individual bills for a particular area. So there might be a public safety omnibus bill, and there might be a judiciary omnibus bill, and that's all of the bills pertaining to those committees. And that might be how it moves instead. It's a slightly different process, something that someone like me or Ingrid could walk you through if you ever need to know the specifics of it. Just know that if things don't look exactly like how I've laid them out, that doesn't necessarily mean that anyone's breaking any rules. Next slide. I want to just go quickly over how funding is determined. So the way that it works is the Office of Management and Budget is going to have an economic forecast for the state of Minnesota. That forecast is going to tell our legislators how much money they have to spend for the whole year. That report is going to go to legislative leadership. It's also going to go to the governor. And the legislative leaders in the House, the Senate, and the governor's office are going to negotiate for a long time to figure out exactly how much money they have to spend. And then they're going to allocate that by committee. So the Public Safety Committee will get a target amount, and the Housing Committee will get a target amount, and the Judiciary Committee will get a target amount. And sometimes that amount is zero. They might tell that committee, you can't spend any money. Sometimes that amount is really high. This year, amounts are much lower. It is expected that we're going to cut almost $500 billion, or in some cases, even more than $500 billion. $500 million. That's a big, much different number. $500 million. So there's going to be cuts, is the point. And not every committee is going to see cuts. Some committees are going to see more than others. It's also important to note that even if a committee gets a $0 target, that doesn't mean it can't spend any money. It means that if it spends money, it has to find savings somewhere else. So that is kind of how we determine how much money everybody has to spend. Now I'll hand it over to Ingrid to continue the presentation.
Well, Jess, thank you so much. And I think it's important to note that we are recording this on April 7th, 2025. And so the context of, cuts and the budget and the importance of understanding a tie, all of these things are very important at this moment in time. And certainly these issues will evolve and change, and we will re-record this. We will re-offer this training, this presentation as the context of this kind of work evolves, as it will. So Jess laid out kind of how the system works, and part of the work that Jess and I do, and if you're watching this, you are also doing this, is you're looking for points of influence and ways that you can share your story or advocate for your community in a way to affect change. And so part of understanding the way that the system operates is also to help you identify folks that you can talk to and where you can share your story to have a meaningful impact. So it certainly depends on, the policy making body that you're trying to impact, or, where you feel like your story, your issue, your concern is going to be met with by folks who have the ability to address that. issue. And so policymaking bodies that that may impact, and in fact really do impact, tribal programs of any type include, of course, local city councils and county boards, from neighboring counties or neighboring communities, especially if you're talking about programs that are based on a reservation or a part of a tribal government, tribal councils and boards that would govern the business of the tribe, any program that is being administered as part of the tribal government, Minnesota legislature, the federal legislature, and then Minnesota and federal administrative agencies. And we will go through these specifically.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about city councils and county boards. So first and foremost, you want to find your elected officials, those people who really count you as a voter and you as a constituent. They are responsible to you as the voter. So find those people, make those connections, find out who represents you in your city or county council, and make that relationship. That's the obvious advice, but there's a little bit more to it that we can give you. Because sometimes it's also really important to establish the connection with the person who actually sets the agenda and runs the business, the person who is kind of making the city council sing, the person who's kind of greasing the wheels on that. That's usually going to be someone like a city clerk or a county administrator or a city manager. For example, in Minneapolis, where I live, that is the city clerk. He kind of runs the administrative side of city council meetings. Knowing that person can really help to make sure that you can get in front of the city council when you need to, because you can just connect with the person you already know, and he can, or that person can like put a good word in for you. So that's just a little bit of, 101 would be your elected officials. 201 is connecting with that city staff that really administers everything else. And I think you'll see some similar advice coming up in some of the other bits. But I can't stress the importance of making sure that the staff that research and set agendas, I can't stress that enough as something that can really help you get in front of councils and boards.
And specifically for tribal councils and boards, we understand that relationships are foundational to all of the work that we do, and not just the work, of course, on behalf of, victims and survivors of crime, but the immense amount of work that is done largely unseen, to administer programs and to, manage sustainable operations of programs as well. So we have a short list here of structures that that influence or impact tribal communities, and obviously the structures vary greatly by community and certainly outside of the state of Minnesota as well. But the advice that Jess offered related to, city councils and boards is largely the same here. So we just encourage you to get familiar with these structures, these local structures, to become familiar with them in a way where you're familiar not only with the structure, but with the folks who are administering them, and to understand the physical land or communities that they govern, as well as the topics like the subject matter that they also can administer. I think it's important to remember, particularly if you are part of a non-tribal program you're looking to work in partnership with a tribal program, or to expand your outreach or your service area into tribal communities, to understand that there is no blanket administrative way of doing these things, and each community is very unique. So we just encourage you to dig deep into those relationships, individually for yourself and individually by the community as well. So as we mentioned before, the same broad advice applies here, and we just have a list of some of the communities and reservations that you might be familiar with and might seek to reach out to. We will repeat this several times during our time together today, but we just warmly invite you to reach out if you don't know where to start, if you don't know which nation, which reservation, which community you're looking to make contact with. Please reach out, and Jess and or I will be happy to help you make that connection for yourself as well.
And I want to add something that Ingrid reminded me of the first time we gave this presentation, which is that at both the local city and county level, and then also at the tribal council and board level, things very rarely work the way that they're written down on paper. There's oftentimes local traditions or habits that people have settled into over years that somebody who comes to council every day understands is going to happen, but isn't actually written down in the rules. So it is something that to get really used to the flows of these things and how these conversations work, what you can say, what you can't say, when you can say it, experience helps. And this applies as strongly, I'd say, at this more local level as it does anywhere. But it does apply to an extent at our state and federal levels as well.
Absolutely. That just kind of like lean into the quirks of the local, spend some time there, spend some time with the folks and familiarize yourself there.
So we're going to talk next about how we can impact the Minnesota legislature. This is where I, in my role, spend 95% of my energy and time. So if you want to contact people at the Minnesota legislature, I have good news. I maintain a spreadsheet of all of our legislators and their aides. So you can reach out to me, and I will be happy to get you that. As Ingrid mentioned, we will be mentioning many times that we are available to you. And at the very last slide of this presentation, we will have our emails available to you. But if you need to contact someone in the Minnesota legislature, reach out. One thing very important to note is that you should always include the legislators' aides if you have the contact for them. These are the people who are going to 99% of the time actually be reading and monitoring the inbox. If a legislator had to do all of the email response that they're expected to do, they would never work. So their assistants and their aides are really going to be key to developing these relationships. And if you can only get a meeting with a legislator's aide, this applies to both the state and the feds, that's good. That's progress. That counts almost as well as getting a meeting with the legislator themselves. So just know that an aide to a legislator is still a really good resource to be connecting with, and is a valid place to be making that connection, even if you're not directly interacting with the legislator themselves.
So as just mentioned, the federal legislature does have some very similar ways of operating, specifically in terms of communicating. I definitely appreciate the reminder to always include the aid and to definitely see it as a win to be able to make contact with them. So as we mentioned before, we might have a contact, we might have some context or an existing relationship with someone at the federal level, and we are always happy to leverage those relationships in support of our local and tribal programs, of course. The system is huge, the offices are big, and often staffers will hold portfolios. And so the kind of the overlap and the staffing structure is a little bit different in that way at the federal legislature. So you can call the main office number, and this information is readily available online, but we also understand that it is one more task that is on your, I'm sure, very, very long to-do list. And so we are happy to support if your capacity doesn't allow you to do kind of that legwork of locating the contact information. But you might look for the information for the staffer who is working on a certain subject area or holds a portfolio relating to a certain subject area. So that might be women's issues, criminal justice issues, tribal issues, which of course, just as a side note, we also understand, and I want to encourage you to keep your eye out because the language across the federal government relating to tribal issues is not consistent. So you might be seeing Indian affairs, you might be seeing tribal, you might be seeing Native American. All of that language really varies depending on the office, depending on committee, depending on the bureau. I mean, all different kinds of things, but it's not certainly not going to be consistent language. And so you kind of need to be able to look for different words that mean the same thing or that you think your issue or area of concern might fall under. And of course, housing issues, which is another one of those topics or areas of concern that many of us have on our radar that goes by a few different terms across the federal government as well.
And I can just add about that, what you said about how language about tribal issues is not always consistent. The same thing is true for women's issues. Some offices will have someone on women's issues, some will have it on gender issues, some won't have anyone like this at all. One of my things that I'm in the habit of doing when I call a federal legislator's office is just describe my issue and say, are you the right person to talk to? And 90% of the time they say, nope. And then they tell me the right person to talk to.
I love that, Jess. That's such a good idea to just kind of be able to describe what you have on your mind, the person that you would like to talk to. I mean, there are a few things more frustrating in this kind of work than getting, 10 minutes into your story and then realizing that you are not talking to the person who can actually help you accomplish your goal.
So the last thing we wanted to talk about is administrative law, and Ingrid's going to help me out on this one. But administrative law is the part of law that's not elected. Essentially, our elected officials have delegated the authority to the executive branch to make its own rules on something. So there's a lot of good reasons for this, but the point is that even though they're not elected, they're still accountable to the public, and they still have to, with non-optionally, um, they have to take input from the public. So highlight right now is the Minnesota Department of Education is taking public comments on health education standards, including comprehensive sex ed and healthy relationship education. So we're setting statewide health educational standards that are going to matter to a lot of our programs. And currently, the Department of Education is in a public comment period for those for those rules. And so this is just something that if there's a rule that's going to come up that's going to really impact your program, it might impact what you have to report to the government. It might impact what kind of services you have to do. And it might impact just general tribal governance structure, sovereignty at all. That has to go through a public comment period and you can make your voice known. The last thing I want to highlight about this kind of law is that if you ever see the government doing something you like, you have to say that you like it because someone's going to be on the other side being mad about it. And if they see a bunch of people mad about it and nobody's sticking up for it, they might change it. Ingrid, do you have anything to add to that? Or do you want to help out with like what administrative agencies would be most typically be looking at here?
Well, it's just so interesting too to consider like that we can't just speak up when things are not going well. That we certainly have an obligation or maybe a responsibility, a privilege to be able to engage you know, all along the experience that we're having. And to kind of expect some reciprocity in the relationship, to say, we appreciate this or this doesn't work for us, or to be able to say, hey, the needs of my community are unique, and so we appreciate this effort, but we can't support this because of our unique situation. And we understand that that is often the case for tribes and for Native folks living in a tribal community or wherever we might be living. And, certainly part of what we've talked about before is that administrative law impacts tribal communities in a way that might be a little bit more hidden for folks who are not living on a reservation or who are not engaged with a tribal government or a tribal community, simply because we're dealing with, federal administrative agencies for things like, environmental health issues. Um, Jess, you talked a little bit about, the Minnesota Department of Education, but also, those agencies at the federal level. We have a sovereign to sovereign relationship with the federal government, which allows us or maybe calls us to have input on a different level about issues relating to law enforcement and maybe implementation of certain services that might not be on the radar of folks who are working in say like a mainstream anti-violence program, but we see as intersectional as Native folks. So, when we're looking at expanded, say expanded development or, accessing natural resources approximate or adjacent to tribal lands, we might be considering that as a safety threat. We might be considering, the data about the increased risk of sexual violence being committed when access or permission is granted for, expanded development, mining, drilling, that type of thing. And so those issues are on our radar to maybe a heightened degree than what our non-native or non-tribal partners might be considering as well. But we certainly do need to be aware of things like comment periods about some of those developments and changes that are happening at the administrative level. And again, we understand that that is one more thing to keep an eye on. It's, one more thing to, kind of be watching and can easily consume us. And so I'm offering Jess and I as your support, as a resource as well. We've, even specifically talking about the public comments on the health education standards, we've done some outreach there and, trying to help all of our communities see the value of contributing to the conversation, whether it's within your own communities or, submitting a comment as well. There are a lot of ways to engage around issues of administrative agencies as well. So all of what we've talked about so far is kind of leading to this, taking action. Our invitation to you is to take action in a way that is meaningful to you, to the work that you're doing, to the communities that you're serving. And we are talking about the power of, direct interaction and communication. So we're talking about constituent interactions. And what we know to be true is that those direct, person to person interactions have much more influence on lawmakers' decisions than any other advocacy strategy. So you might be thinking about, what does it mean when we're saying advocacy in this framework? And I know, most of us are advocates at heart, like advocates, in a movement, advocates about an issue. But we'll talk a little bit here about the difference between lobbying and then legislative advocacy, because most of us, have probably heard about lobbyists. Maybe we have an idea in our head about what lobbying looks like. But there are some really important issues here to unpack, and we'll do our best to kind of give an overview of this, and we can certainly continue the conversation in greater detail as if there is a need to. So lobbying is the attempt to influence the passage, defeat, introduction, or amendment of legislation, an attempt to influence any specific legislation. So this could be direct. So like expressing directly, communicating directly with a legislator that they should support a specific bill, whether it's, a bill about a certain subject or, that has a number, or grassroots, perhaps asking the general public to contact legislators to support a specific bill. So there sometimes is like a reluctance to meet with legislators, but we're still talking in our communities about a specific bill, or we're still, asking folks that we work with, or, maybe that we're just close with to take direct action about the specific bill. That would be lobbying. Advocacy is I think much more broad. So we're really talking in advocacy about educating legislators about who you are, what you do, what the needs are that you're presenting or bringing to them at that moment. Maybe the need for funding, or how the lack of funding or the need for expanded funding is impacting the services that you can offer to your community. Maybe you're talking, just kind of sharing a story about the needs of your program, the needs of survivors in your community, just more broadly, kind of just sharing the picture of what you are doing maybe day to day, and the needs of your community, regardless of legislation. And we also know that there is, I don't want to, it kind of is a fear, or maybe some reluctance to get anywhere near lobbying, because we are told, we are instructed, we understand that depending on our sources of funding, that we cannot engage in lobbying. And it's very good to know what the boundaries are, because we don't want to be stuck in fear, and to be stuck there in a way that inhibits us from advocating for our programs or for advocating for our communities. We all have a very important story to tell. We all are carrying the stories of our communities, of our relatives, of our ancestors, of survival, of strength, and those stories matter. And those stories can absolutely affect change, and they have brought about enormous change. I would say, particularly in the state of Minnesota, we've had some remarkable victories because of folks who are willing to tell their story. So here are some things that you can do as a 501c3 organization. And of course, we encourage you to understand your status, your funding sources, your classification as an organization, and to consult with your attorneys, with maybe your board as well, if you have any questions. So you can conduct things like voter registration or nonpartisan get out the vote efforts. We're just always excited to see these kind of efforts, specifically in Indian country. The emphasis, of course, being nonpartisan. Can educate the public on issues and encourage participation in the political process. Education can look like distributing one-pagers or pamphlets, or just engaging in conversation about topics that might be relevant, or, what does it look like to submit a comment during a public comment period? All of those things just to encourage participation, and to educate all candidates and political parties on your specific issues. So we certainly, want to be able to share the story and the needs of our programs and our communities, regardless of, a party or, partisan affiliation. Just want to be able to educate and to share the needs. And again, to conduct or participate in a nonpartisan candidate forum. Caveat with this is just that it must be open to all candidates for a particular office, must be run in a balanced way, and include a broad range of nonpartisan candidates. And you could make presentations on your organization's issues to create a community platform, campaign, candidates campaign, media, and or to the general public. And you could work on behalf of a specific ballot measure. And then just to get back to some of that, the concern about where the boundaries lie, we just want to make sure to emphasize that as a 501c3, you cannot endorse or oppose a specific candidate for public office, either implicitly or explicitly. You cannot contribute money or time for a particular candidate, and you cannot coordinate activities with a specific candidate.
So now that we've got all of that out of the way, we're going to talk about the best ways to contact your legislators and communicate your needs. I want to just start saying that Ingrid and I have both heard often that this is not something people have time and ability to do. And that's okay. We understand that you are all serving as many survivors as you can in your community, and we know that that job comes first. At the same time, we want to give you the tools to communicate effectively with your legislators when you can talk to them, and kind of have that gentle reminder that can be an effective, almost low effort way to get on the radars of some people who are high up in decision making and make sure that they can think of you when they're making decisions for the whole state. So there is a really important part of this, and we also want to note that we know your first duty is to your clients, and we don't want to ever get in the way of that or say that this is the most important thing in the world. So next slide. Messaging matters. You want to be thinking before you go to talk to your legislator, think about why you're contacting them. You think about why should they support or oppose a bill that could create a problem for you or create a solution for you. And how does that help shape a violence-free Minnesota? I know that's cheeky with our name, but that is the goal of all six of our coalitions, is to prevent violence here in Minnesota. And you want to make it personal. You're their constituent. You're the person with the story from their district, and you can make sure that they know that this problem exists in their own community, so they should do something about it. Can we go next slide? Thank you. The next thing, this is kind of an organizational tool for you. If your legislator can answer these four questions about you, then when they see any bill, they can analyze it through you. So if they know who you are, if they know what you do, if they can know what you would want to do if things were better, and what are your challenges in accomplishing your mission, they can analyze a bill via your lens even without directly talking to you, right? They might see a bill come across their head and they might say, "Oof, what would my domestic violence shelter want me to do in this situation? What would my sexual assault crisis center want me to do in this situation?" Um, and so the main thing that we want to develop here is the answers to these four questions if you only have the time to give a general message instead of supporting anything in specific. So how do we create connection? First, we consider our audience. In this case, it's almost always going to be legislators and their aides. And what are the shared values of that audience? You love using a "in Minnesota, we take care of one another" type answer, but you want to focus on these kind of universal themes that every politician, no matter the party, is going to at least claim to use in their campaign materials. You want to stress your community, your caring, your empathy, your respect, your redemption, all of these things that are politically neutral, positive words that create connection between you and a legislator. You also want to use common sense, simple logic, saying this is a good investment, saying we're being really resourceful, and so it'll be good to give our program more money, saying we know what works. I am one of these people, and I know Ingrid is too. We love nuance. We love the parts of an argument that don't always work that well. They don't need to be said out loud in front of every legislator. You can always just say, "This is what works. We know this is what works." And if they want to ask you about the downsides of your argument, you should have an explanation, but you don't have to give them in your pitch. You're giving an elevator pitch, you're not giving an overall risk assessment. Clarity is key. Uh, in order to organize your thoughts, I offer this formula. This formula was originally introduced to me in junior high. So if you learned from the same curriculum I did, you might have this drilled into your head as much as I did. But you're going to think about your claim. What do you need, or what's your problem? Your claim is, what is the topic that you want to talk about, and what do you need done about it? It's more than just a topic sentence. It's also, what do you need done? Then you're going to have your evidence. How can you best illustrate that problem or illustrate the solution that you need? Is it a story? Do you have data? How can you best bring that to your legislator? And then the last part of this, and this is the most important part, is your warrant. What makes it so that your offered solution fixes the problem that you claim happens, right? You can't just say, I don't have any food, so give me some water. You have to say, I don't have any food, so give me food, and this is why giving me food would solve my hunger problem, right? And the thing that separates good arguments from great arguments is having a really good connection between your proposed solution and the problem. So making sure that you focus the majority of your time on explaining that connection to your legislator is a really good way to make your argument clearly. Uh, and I'll hand it to Ingrid to talk a little bit about storytelling.
So we, as just was just mentioning, making that connection between what you're bringing and the problem that you are offering a solution to is critical to engaging with legislators and engaging with the system. And I love talking about the storytelling part of this because storytelling is a traditional practice. And it's valuable because stories stick with us and stories are memorable and stories are what we carry with us. Many of us, have even an origin story within the movement. And I love to hear those. So if I ever run into you or if you ever see me, I definitely want to hear your story. But stories are powerful because they inherently make a connection between a human experience and a human experience maybe in that demonstrates a problem or that demonstrates a critical issue within a community and a solution, or highlighting the need for a response to a problem, to a concern. So maybe you have a story about why ending relationship abuse is important to you. And maybe you have a story about why needing expanded funding for your program and the program that serves your community is important to you. Or maybe you want to share a story about what the community has described as their need or what is important to them. Is there a client story that is especially powerful, either due to, it being a successful story through advocacy, or maybe it's a story that highlights a need that went unmet due to lack of funding or infrastructure? And what we're again trying to do with those stories is we're trying to make that connection for the elected official. I think often about, like, why do we remember, nursery rhymes, or why do we remember these, silly, even like nonsensical little songs that we all learned when we were kids? It's because there's a connection, like there's a story even within those little songs. And those stories are compelling to us, those of us who are in the movement. And when we have a moment to talk about those stories, we're able to share that heart. We're able to share what is compelling and to forge a human connection between that. And the dollar amounts don't always share the story. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can attach a story to that and maybe infuse a dollar amount, or infuse an increased rate, or how whatever metric into that story. But we're again trying to offer this as a tool to legislators to be able to carry that story as well. I also just want to highlight that carrying stories when you're in the movement to end violence can be very lonely, can be very hard. They can weigh on us, and there can be some healing even in taking a moment to access your own story or to develop your own story. And so if you ever want to sit down with me or Jess, or with any of our teams and talk about what your story could be, or how you'd like to bring all of the weight of the experiences that you're carrying into a story that you can share, that is a message, that is a request for support, or that makes that connection for a legislator. We would love to support you in that as well, because that is a practice. And sometimes as advocates, we don't get to access those stories within ourselves for our own safety and for our own welfare as well.
I want to double down on what you just said about storytelling, and especially making the connection for the official. Um, they hear a lot of stories. And so, no matter how obvious it seems like your story applies to your request, make it more obvious. Make it blindingly obvious why you're telling them this story. Because they hear a lot and they're going to get them mixed up, and that's not their fault. They're just people. The other part I wanted to stress is Ingrid and I's openness to working with everybody here. Um, I frequently prepare people for legislative testimony. Legislative testimony is 2 minutes long. We're condensing stories of 10 to 20 years of relationship abuse into the 2 minutes that we think are going to make the biggest difference. When you meet with a legislator, if you're not hosting them for a tour of your facility, you're going to get probably 15 minutes as a long meeting. And so determining how to most effectively tell a story that's going to have hours of details and just boiling that down into the details that you think are most important to tell, that you're most comfortable telling, that you don't think are going to hurt you for saying. That's a process that takes some experience and it takes some doing. So people like Ingrid and I are really happy to work with you on that and on condensing stories into its most critical points. I think something that people who don't have our job, the little bit of free advice is we love to focus sometimes on the gruesome details of it. But what Ingrid and I like to focus on usually actually is more how did like your services help? Because what the legislator is doing is supporting our services. And so what they need to know is how that helped. They actually don't need to know very much at all about what happened. They need to know how you were helped, if that makes sense. So I also find that when I tell people that, they're relieved because they don't want to have to relive everything that happened. So that's just a little bit about storytelling that I wanted to second from Ingrid because I heard you saying the same type of things as well.
Absolutely.
On the topic of brevity, sometimes you're only going to have 30 to 60 seconds to talk to a legislator. What would you do if you had 30 to 60 seconds? If you have a longer story, it's perfectly fine to make an appointment to meet some other way. But it's for your elevator pitch, if you just see your legislator out and about, if you're at a community event with them, if they stop at your table at something, what would you say to them if you only had 60 seconds? Practice that. Find someone who is your colleague and say, this is what I would say. Find someone who's outside the movement to make sure that what you're saying makes sense to someone who doesn't speak our language. Nonprofits in general speak their own language, and sexual violence and domestic violence people also do that. Very important also to note that we love our acronyms. They don't know our acronyms. Your state level legislators do not know the acronyms that the federal government uses, and our federal level legislators do not know the acronyms that our state level legislators use. Don't use acronyms. Don't say VOCA, say Victims of Crime Act. Don't say ICWA, say Indian Children's Welfare Act. Um, it's really important to be clear and you only have 30 to 60 seconds. And if someone's gonna, and you're probably not gonna get a lot of questions because legislators have a lot of people to hear from.
And you don't want to miss an opportunity because you're unprepared. So I appreciate the advice, Jess, to practice, maybe even to get together with a colleague and to make sure that you are prepared when the opportunity presents itself.
I think that's the end of our presentation today. I know we threw a lot of information at you, so we're going to leave these on our screen for a while. Just feel free to take down our information and shoot us an email. I can't speak on Ingrid's behalf, though I think she'll agree with me when I say we're both very busy people this time of year. And so if we don't respond to your email in a reasonable time, please just follow up. We don't want anything to fall through our cracks, but sometimes things do. So just don't feel any shame about double emailing us.
Yes, we are not going to be bothered by that whatsoever. Um, I just want to reiterate that I'm Ingrid. I'm from the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. My email address is the letter I, and then my last name, Anderson, @MIWSAC. And we have, if you go to our website. If you just go to the MIWSAC website, you can find our contact us information and information about our programming there as well. Same thing for Jess. And we are happy to talk about anything we discussed in our presentation with you today. We're also happy to talk through, something that we did not discuss. If you have other questions, other areas of concern or topics that you'd like to discuss, we are available. And if we don't know, again, I hope you don't mind me speaking for you, Jess, but if we don't know the answer, we will find someone who does. And we're happy to do some of that legwork for you. We certainly just want to encourage you and to make sure that you are very well resourced in the work that you're doing on behalf of your community, on behalf of our people. And we thank you for being advocates in the movement, and advocates for keeping programs running well, being healthy programs. We know it's an enormous amount of work, and we appreciate you. We extend our deep gratitude to you, particularly for joining us in this hour today.
Thank you.